Hello.
Hi, welcome to the February 22nd Sustainability Council Committee special meeting. We are going to begin with the agenda. And we're actually going to start with roll call. Councilmember Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Harmon. Okay. Councilmember Snedden.
Here.
And hopefully Councilmember Harmon will be joining us shortly. Okay. Next on the agenda is public comments. And if you are attending this meeting and you would like to speak, please raise your hand. I will see that, and then I will unmute you so you're able to talk. And at this time, it appears that no one is raising their hand. So we will move on to the next item of the agenda, which is item number 2, or apologize, item number 3, selection of a committee chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moen. So yes, council members Friedman, Snedden, and Harmon. I do see Councilmember Harmon has joined us. We do need to select a new chair as the mayor is no longer, or Mayor Maria was the chair of this committee. So are there any nominations for a chair for the Sustainability Committee? Or volunteers?
I'd volunteer.
I'll support Councilmember Snedden to be chair.
Great. So Mr. Moen, if you could take a vote, that would be great.
Okay, we will be doing a vote. All of those in favor of.
I think we need to do a roll call.
Redo a roll call. Okay. Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon.
It looks like she dropped off the call.
Okay. Councilmember Snedden.
Yes.
Okay, are we waiting for Councilmember
Yeah,
Harmon?
She just texted me her internet just kicked out, so she's restarting, so she should be back on in a minute. So do you want to wait or should we go to the next item? I think she should be on momentarily, so I think it's probably okay to go to the next item.
Yeah, I think we could hold it and wait for her vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next item would be item.
You want to wait for a vote on the chair position, or should we go on?
I think we should wait on her vote for the chair position, because
Okay.
I don't know, maybe she wanted to volunteer. I wasn't sure.
Okay, we'll just hold off on that for a second. So I'll just text her to see where she is in line. So give me 1 second.
So we will return to item 3 once she returns, and we're going to move on to item 4 for now, which is presentation of city's new environmental purchasing policy.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Daniela Rosales, and I am an environmental specialist too with Environmental Services. And today I will give a presentation on the city's new environmental purchasing policy. Next slide, please. So the city has an existing environmental purchasing policy. However, we are updating the policy, which is also known as the sustainable purchasing policy, to include local ordinances, state legislation requirements, and more waste reduction guidance for city departments. The purpose of the policy is to ensure responsible stewardship of environmental resources. The city of Santa Barbara is a large purchaser, so it is important to make sure that we purchase qualified products and services that are less harmful to the environment. This policy will apply to all city departments and would extend to any contracted services, such as contracted custodial staff, for example. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with this update, we have made waste reduction a priority, followed by reuse, and then followed by recycling. The policy targets office supplies, facilities and custodial supplies, and city event supplies. The city's central store warehouse already carries an inventory of supplies that have been reviewed by our staff and meet this policy standard. And this provides city departments with a convenient way to purchase items internally. Next slide, please. Another reason we've updated the policy is also to include new state legislative requirements from Senate Bill 1383. SB 1383 is a statewide effort to reduce methane emissions through organic waste reduction. And the state requires jurisdictions to procure paper products that are not only recyclable, but also contain a minimum of 30% post-consumer recycled content. So jurisdictions are also required to procure recovered organic waste products such as compost, mulch, renewable energy, or electricity. And we will meet this state procurement requirement by updating this policy and tracking and reporting our purchases to the state. Next slide, please. This slide shows some of the updates we are making to the existing policy. The existing policy encouraged best practices, while the updated policy has more targeted goals to better guide staff's purchasing decisions. For example, the existing policy encouraged the purchase of durable items, while the new policy includes specific language from the city's single-use ordinances, such as not purchasing expanded polystyrene products, otherwise known as styrofoam, or plastic straws for city events. The policy is meant to target everyday office purchases such as paper and printer cartridges, but we do refer any larger city facility projects to the city's green building guidelines. Next slide, please. Our next steps are to work directly with city departments to assist them in implementing the policy, especially the large purchasers. Environmental Services will provide education and trainings to any new and existing city staff. We've already done some trainings, and we will visit city facilities to work through any potential purchasing challenges. We are also working with our paper product vendors to receive updated purchasing reports that will align with the state's reporting requirements. Next slide, please. In summary, the sustainable purchasing policy promotes the prudent use of resources to minimize the city's impact on the environment and ensures compliance with SB 1383. And our recommendation is that the Sustainability Council Committee provide comments regarding the city's sustainable purchasing policy and how the policy supports requirements set forth in SB 1383. So council members, I thank you for your time. If you have any questions regarding the policy, you can ask me or my manager, Lorraine Cruz Carpenter, as well. And at this point, I will hand the presentation over to Lorraine to go over an update on the solid waste hauler contract renewal process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Lorraine Cruz Carpenter.
Lorraine, one second, Lorraine, sorry, this item's concluding, so the council's
Yeah.
going to provide their comments now.
Oh,
Sorry.
I think I'll go ahead and make a comment that I'm really appreciative of bringing this forward and getting us in line with our own policies and procedures. So I think it's a advisable and good move to be making. Okay, thanks.
All right, is there any other comments?
I'll just say I appreciate staff bringing this forward. I think it moves us in the right direction, especially with state mandates. And so just supportive of the direction we're going. Thanks.
I will third that. Apologies for being late. Thank you.
Okay, should we continue on or should we go back to item 3, the selection of the committee chair, or should we do that at a after item 5? Does anyone have any input on if they would like to go back to item 3, selection of committee chair now?
I'm fine going back because it was on the agenda and all 3 of us are here. So I'm fine with going back to it. It should be a pretty quick item.
Okay. Does anyone have a nomination or recommendation for the new committee chair?
I'll
Just,
volunteer.
yeah, just update Councilmember Harmon. Councilmember Sneddon did volunteer.
That sounds awesome. I will enthusiastically second that, if that was a motion.
Okay, should we do a just a quick roll call again to confirm that?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman,
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon,
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other recommendations or are we moving forward with that selection?
I think we can go to the next agenda item. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next item is item 5, which is update on solid waste hauler contract renewal process.
hi. Hi there. Good afternoon. Lorraine Cruz Carpenter, Acting Environmental Services Manager. And today I'm here to give an update on the solid waste hauler contract renewal process. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide an update on the status of studies and services we have underway to prepare for the expiration of our solid waste collection services contract. The current contract is set to expire on June 8th, 2023. This update will also include an overview of the scope of services the consultant will provide, which is essential in thoroughly developing a new contract. Next slide, please. To review, the city provides essential waste collection and disposal services to the community through an exclusive franchise agreement. This includes collection and disposal of trash, recycling, green waste, and food scraps for both the residential and commercial sectors, ensuring public health and climate change and sustainability goals and requirements. The system provides services to approximately 21,000 accounts citywide. Included are illegal dumping pickup, bulky item pickup, and hazardous materials collection services. The total cost for this system, including collection, processing, and disposal from 2013 to 2023 is $214 million. This is the city's second largest contract. Next slide, please. In preparation for the new contract, we have 2 studies underway, a cost of service study and a waste characterization study. We'll also obtain consulting services to manage the procurement and negotiation process. These industry tools are important because they'll help us gain insight and aid in developing a contract to meet the needs of our community for the next 15 years. Next slide, please. A waste characterization study is essentially a scientific way to sort through our waste. It assesses the amount and types of waste we dispose of, which can give us insight to materials we need to target or programs that should be developed. Most importantly, the waste characterization study will help us understand our waste stream and develop services to be included in the next franchise agreement. Cascadia Consulting Group was selected for this study, and a kickoff meeting was held in January. Unfortunately, field work was scheduled to begin the beginning of February, but due to COVID-related delays, the work has been rescheduled for the first week in April. Next slide, please. The cost of service study will ensure that we understand how much each aspect of providing solid waste service costs. Once we establish a baseline for the current cost of service, we can then structure the new agreement to make sure that the rates for each sector accurately reflect the cost of providing the service. This study will also enable us to confidently design rates that will ensure reliable collection of necessary revenues. Next slide, please. The cost of service study is currently underway. MSW Consultants was selected for this project and began work in January. During the month of February, MSW will focus on investigation and data collection. They'll also conduct comparative analysis with other jurisdictions during the months of February and March. In April, staff will receive a phase 1 report with preliminary findings. And in June, MSW will provide a finding and recommendations report, which will include rate and fee methodologies. The contract with MSW extends through July 2023 to assist with preparation of new rates and fees for fiscal year 24. Next slide, please. Due to the complexity of the franchise agreement, staff will utilize consulting services for the negotiation and procurement process. A consultant can provide technical knowledge and expertise vital in developing a franchise agreement of this scope. The consultant will also manage the procurement process in an objective, fair, and transparent manner. Last, the use of a consultant will ultimately ensure a cost-effective and performance-based franchise agreement. A request for proposals is currently out to bid. The deadline is March 8th for submittals. Staff plans to select a consultant and bring the item to council for approval in April. Next slide, please. The consultant services are critical as they will bring all the pieces together to develop a comprehensive long-term contract. The scope of work will include providing a comprehensive analysis of our solid waste program, including reviewing current contracts and findings from the cost of service study and waste characterization studies. They'll also conduct 3 stakeholder outreach meetings to gain input on community needs. Stakeholders will include our residential, commercial, and city facility customers. As part of their analysis, the consultant will be asked to provide recommendations and guidance on cost-effective modifications to programs and services, changes to be in alignment with industry standards. Next slide, please. They will also make recommendations to ensure that we are in compliance with current legislation and prepare for any upcoming legislation. They'll advise on implementation of environmental goals, including items such as zero emissions vehicles. They'll also make recommendations on areas in the contract to increase transparency and incorporate performance measures. Next slide, please. Oh, one slide back, sorry. In consultation with city staff, they'll be responsible for preparing an RFP procurement package for solid waste collection services, and the consultant will manage the procurement and negotiation process. So this is really an exciting time for the city. Although it's an extensive process, we'll have the opportunity to re-envision and comprehensively make decisions in designing a modern agreement that'll be effective for the next 15 years. This is the second largest contract in the city with an estimated value of $210 million over the course of the upcoming contract period. Therefore, acquiring expert advice and conducting this analysis will be essential in obtaining an agreement that meets the community's needs through 2038 at the best value for our ratepayers. And with that, I conclude this presentation and open to any questions. Oh, the next slide. Sorry, I'll read the recommendation is that the committee receive a presentation from staff and provide comments regarding the status of milestones and work products related to the negotiation of a new solid waste hauler agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. I have some questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
I do, but I'll go after.
Okay, so I was just wondering, will it matter where they are hauling to? So if this is 15 years and through 2023, and if just say Tahigas is at capacity and we need to be looking at where else our waste might be hauled to, would that be in the consideration with
Yes.
the RFP? Okay.
That's Councilmember Sneddon. That's a great question. The consultants will be evaluating that. They'll take all of that into analysis. They'll look at existing facilities and potential new facilities, and they'll provide that in the recommendations for the RFP package.
Okay, thank you. And then will this at any point go to the finance committee since it's our second largest contract, or does it go right from this study and then to council in April and June, or will it make a stop through finance?
I believe, yes. Alelia, can you add in on that? I believe it will go to the finance committee.
Sorry there, I couldn't get unmuted. Yes, Councilmember Sneddon, it will go to finance committee prior to going to full council, and it will actually probably come back to this committee as well before we're moving on with final recommendations.
Thank you. Thanks. Those were my only questions. And Councilmember Friedman?
Thank you. That was one of my questions. So the other question I had is we're doing the cost of service study. And then as I noticed in the report, that would help inform any rate increases coming forward. And it looked like we were planning, when would we be planning to bring any rate increases forward?
So from the cost of service study, that would be taken into consideration, and the MSW consultants will be assisting on the 2024 rates based on their findings from this study.
So all this wouldn't affect the rates for next fiscal year. So we're talking a little over a year out is when we would see from the work we're doing now, any cost of service and adjustments we need to make in terms of rates. So that'd be
That's
July of 24, is that right?
24.
And then, or July of 23, I guess, right? Fiscal year 24, right?
It would be for effective for the 2024 rates.
Okay, so that's a little over a year. And then how long would those rates be good for before you have to do another cost of service? It's not gonna be for the full 15 years, right? So how many years would they be? And the reason I'm asking that, it gets into the question that Councilmember Stetten just asked. If the landfill goes to capacity, there would be a definite change in the rates at that time, depending on what options we have. So I'm just wondering, we go into new rates, and how long are those good for with the small adjustments before we have to do another cost of service analysis?
Well, we review our rates annually as part of the budget process. So if there were any factors to consider, it would be done on an annual basis. I would imagine that after doing a large overhaul of this nature, it would be a while unless there were industry things that occurred in the industry that would change that or bring that for discussion.
Okay, so the information would be good to help us with our rates for a few years out, for a while, not just annually or something.
Yeah, and that's part of why this process is so important, because it'll give us a chance to comprehensively look at things with that expert knowledge to look out several years.
Great. And then the last question I had, it comes up from time to time from community, and I think since we're talking about this, it'd be good just to reference this. So there's the yellow bins of the food waste, and there's a lot of questions about why don't we do that in our city? Other cities are doing it, and you have the state. So can you speak to how we're handling food scraps, since we're not using yellow bins, just more for the public and for our understanding too?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Friedman. That's a great question, and I'm glad we get to highlight that today. Due to the fact that we use the resource center, the food that goes into containers in the residential sector is actually sorted at the resource center. So unlike many cities that are starting to roll out yellow bins, we're actually already taking care of that and handling that on the back end. So although residents will not see that yellow bin at home, it is actually being processed per the state legislation 1383 requirements. Our businesses and restaurants are still using, they have the yellow bin containers. We've had them in a program for several years, and we're continuing that program to assist with it makes for a cleaner stream of waste as well and better product.
Great, thank you. That was it. I just wanted to highlight that because we are starting to get more questions about that particular issue. So thank you.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
At this time, we do not. I do want to remind all attendees, if they wish to speak on any of the items, to please click the raised hand option. And once I see that, I will unmute you so you can speak on particular items. And at this time, there is still no one with their hand raised at this moment.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments on this before moving on? This is another one that I'm sure we'll all be really interested in the findings and hearing back the cost, particularly with what might be happening with Tahigas. So looking forward to hearing that back. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 6, which is update on sea level rise adaptation plan implementation.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Melissa Hedrick, Acting Energy and Climate Manager for the Sustainability and Resilience Department. And today I'm going to give an update on our sea level rise implementation program. Next slide. So as you may recall, in February 2021, Council adopted the city's first sea level rise adaptation plan. And the plan presents a phased approach to planning for sea level rise based on closely monitoring changing conditions and taking actions when certain thresholds or triggers are reached. It recommends a number of very specific near-term actions the city can take in the next 10 years to prepare for sea level rise. And then it proposes a structure for decision-making in the mid and long term. This approach really relies heavily on the city developing a shoreline monitoring program. In addition, the sea level rise adaptation plan recommended that moving forward, the city develop internally a 5-year implementation plan to further scope out near-term actions and essentially get those actions ready to be put into the capital improvement program. And that the city reevaluate the overall adaptation plan every 5 to 10 years. Next slide. So just a quick recap, these were the highest priorities identified in the plan to start as soon as possible. So again, the shoreline monitoring program, updating the hazard mitigation program, which is actually underway, redesigning Laguna Tide Gate, relocating major sewer infrastructure located under the beach, looking at changes to our beach nourishment activities, raising the harbor breakwater and groins and marinas, and then looking at potential triggers for closing Stearns Wharf during major storms. Next slide. So about a year ago, we launched the Sea Level Rise implementation program out of our Sustainability and Resilience Department, where it's being centrally coordinated. But we are working closely with a climate adaptation staff interdepartmental team. If you recall, we previously had a staff team for development of the Sea Level Rise plan. It's now been expanded in scope to look at not just sea level rise, but other adaptation and resilience efforts. And we're actually in the process of rethinking or rescoping the sea level rise subcommittee, and our thoughts at least now are to do the same. So essentially expand the scope of the subcommittee to look at all climate adaptation and resilience issues, not just sea level rise. So in the last few months, we've been essentially developing that 5-year implementation plan. We've been taking our list of 42 near-term action measures and scoping them out, talking closely with our interdepartmental team, talking to consultants, getting exact dollar amounts. And I think even more importantly, looking at the different actions and how they can be combined. So what studies or actions make sense to be done together and to apply for funding together. In addition, we've been tracking emerging information and legislation, and we've been engaged with our state and federal and regional entities. Councilmember Friedman knows that we sit on a coastal cities and coastal counties sea level rise working group with the Coastal Commission. We also sit on Beacon, which is now tasked with looking at sea level rise. And we're also engaged in our Sea Level Rise Climate Collaborative group. But what we've been spending a lot of time on is pursuing and applying for funding opportunities for our implementation projects. And as you may have heard, the state had a huge budget surplus this year and designated a very large amount of money toward resilience projects in the upcoming years. So for instance, Coastal Commission got about $30 million to disperse this year in grant funds for resilience projects. I believe Coastal Conservancy got $500 million to disperse in resilience projects over the next 2 years. And so the city really is in a good position to obtain a lot of this funding right now because we are one of the few agencies that has completed our adaptation plan and are in implementation mode and have specific projects that we're looking at. And so we did apply for 3 grant applications with Coastal Commission through their local coastal program grants program. And we did just hear that from Coastal Commission staff that they are recommending all 3 of our grant applications at the Coastal Commission's March hearing. So we'll hear the final word in March at the Coastal Commission hearing. But assuming we do get those grants, we will be returning to council to accept any grant monies and then appropriate the funds. The next slide. So the first grant application that we applied to Coastal Commission for was for a regional coastal adaptation monitoring program. And the purpose of this program is to track parameters such as sea levels, beach width, left position, groundwater levels, so that we know when certain adaptation actions are needed. And it really just makes sense that all the agencies in the region are tracking the same parameters. In addition, having a program like this allows us to evaluate at a regional scale, both the success and impacts of projects. And so even though the city applied for this grant and will be a partner in this project, the money would essentially go to Beacon to lead this project. And so the monitoring program would be developed for all the cities and counties in the Santa Barbara and Ventura County area. It would be developed with Beacon's science advisory team, a team of consultants, and then an agency stakeholder team, which the city would be a member of. And then following development of the monitoring program, Beacon would conduct 2 years of pilot monitoring, and then we'd have a reevaluation process, essentially looking to see if any changes need to be made to the monitoring program. Next slide. So the second grant application were for a number of projects that are high priority in our waterfront area. And this project would be managed out of our Sustainability and Resilience Department, but would be closely coordinating with other departments. So the first part of this plan would be a wastewater and water systems adaptation options report, looking at feasible options for moving or otherwise floodproofing our sewer main and other co-located infrastructure that's located under the beach, and looking at potential adaptation options for that lower part of our wastewater system. In addition, this study will be satisfying permit requirements we have for El Estero and looking at mid and long-term adaptation options for the El Estero Water Resource Center. The second study is a feasibility study and concept plan for options to raise or otherwise modify the harbor breakwater, rock rinds, sand spit, and walkways around the harbor. And then both of these studies would feed into what we're calling a 30-year waterfront adaptation plan. So you can basically think of this as a 30-year master shoreline plan for the waterfront. We'll be looking at changing our existing sediment management and beach berm activities on the waterfront, how to design any new structures, what amount of sea level rise should we be planning for, and then looking at options to flood-proof our harbor commercial area and some other structures. So next slide. So the 30-year timeframe in this plan really represents that time period where we still see most of the impacts of sea level rise located south of Cabrillo Boulevard. Next slide. But before we would have to employ large-scale flood protection measures like levees that could substantially alter the nature of the waterfront. Next slide. So the third grant application will be led by the airport department. It's an airport and Galita Slough adaptation plan. The airport area was actually not included in our original sea level rise adaptation plan because at the time we got the funding for our adaptation plan, the airport was participating in a interagency effort to look at the entire Galita Slough area together. And that resulted in the Galita Slough area sea level rise plan. That plan really did focus on the slough itself and on management of the mouth of the slough, but it did not take a very detailed look at infrastructure at the airport. And so this work program would take the 2015 Galita Slough area sea level rise plan and build upon it to make an airport specific adaptation plan. And it would essentially be the same format as our existing citywide adaptation plan. You can almost think of it as adding a section for the airport into our adaptation plan. In addition, a portion of this money would go toward finishing a comprehensive update to the airport and Galita Slough local coastal program that has been needed for a while. Next slide. So other high priority projects that are very high on our list, but we haven't gotten funding for yet are the redesign of the Laguna Tidegate system and channel, and then a suite of projects that we're calling the coastal flooding and drainage projects. And really we are seeing these all very interrelated, and we would like to apply for funding for all of them at once. And this suite of projects includes studying increased flooding from changes in rainfall from climate change interacting with sea level rise, and then taking that information, doing a master drainage study and a look at potential impacts to the stormwater system and adaptation options for the stormwater system. This master drainage study and stormwater study is something that the city's actually needed for a long time, but has become a higher priority with sea level rise. And then related to all this is looking at changes to floodplain regulations for new development south of Highway 101 and reevaluating the adequacy of our current development setbacks along creeks. So those are kind of the two other big projects that are high priority that we'll be looking at funding for. To be honest, we are being approached by a lot of state agencies asking us to apply for funding. And so really the struggle for us is not so much in getting the grant funding right now, it's actually staffing the projects once we get the grant funding and making sure that we can do everything that we are signing up for and are able to complete everything. It is pretty unprecedented that we're seeing all this money for resilience at once. And so we're really just trying to balance taking advantage of that funding while also making sure that we have the resources to do it. So next slide. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for comments or questions.
Councilmember Harmon, did you have some?
Thank you, Chair Sneddon. I just have comments. Should I wait until after public comment?
Do we have public comment on this item?
At this time, we do not have any public comments on this item.
Okay, and I think you can go ahead, Councilmember Harmon. Yeah.
Thank you so
Mayor
much.
Pro Tem Harmon, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just very briefly, I wanted to say, wow, how incredible your work has been, staff, the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Committee. You know, being new to the Coastal Commission, it's been a real eye-opener for me to see just how far ahead truly we are. Obviously we have to be, it's vital, it's urgent, but it is impressive beyond belief. I mean, it really is. I see month after month where so many communities are, and it is such a gift what you all have done, putting us in the position to be able to get these grants, to be prepared for what is inevitable. I have to say, I mean, I don't think it's too dramatic to say I feel lucky raising my family in a community where we are trying to be prepared for this in a way and understand the gravity of what's coming. It's really hit home for me to see across the state just how committed we are, how expert we are, really. And I'm thrilled to see that the Coastal Commission staff has recommended our projects, and really excited for the meeting in March to vote in favor of it. And I just, everyone from the committee members, especially to staff, it's a real gift to our community what you've done. And I see it month after month in a way that I don't think I understood before. So I wanted to share my real appreciation for everything that you've done and are doing. We've got a long way to go, but we're real leaders on this, thanks to all of you. So my gratitude.
Thanks, Councilmember Harbin.
Councilmember Friedman.
Hi.
Both of you can chime in.
Not sure if you can see me. I hit the wrong button, and so my camera is not showing on my screen. But anyway,
We see two of you. Your photo is your backdrop.
I don't know what I did. I was like moving something around, so I'll stop my camera for right now. So.
Oh no, come back on. Come back on.
All right, I'll talk to Vince later. So anyways, I just want to say thank you to staff for all this, and it's great news on the beacon, on the beacon grant in particular, on the regional shoreline monitoring, because we are moving forward as a region on this. So it really gets economies of scale for us, rather than each individual agency having to do their own monitoring and using similar but maybe not exactly the same metrics. So it's and that's going to be a model for the state, actually, because I think we're going to be one of the first to kind of implement that. And then I'm really excited about the Waterfront Adaptation plan to be moving forward with that, because that is some major planning efforts that we're going to need to do, just in terms of getting ahead of those as the trigger points come forward. The question I had maybe for Melissa was the expansion of the scope of the sea level rise committee you mentioned, and what did you mean by, are we looking at just adaptation in general? So would we be reconstituting that committee? Would it be a council subcommittee of 3 council members, or would it be the same group that just has expanded an expanded scope? Or would we be kind of looking at, because right now we have planning commissioners, parks commissioners on there. So are we looking at the same group that with just expanded responsibilities, or are we changing the makeup of that, of the sea level rise group?
Councilmember Friedman, we're really scoping it right now. So we're open to ideas and comments from you all. I do think it's been really great that the subcommittee includes members from Water Commission and Parks and Harbor, etc. We may want to add in airport now that we're folding that in, only because as you saw on the sea level rise subcommittee, it really helps to have those commissioners up to date on sea level rise projects. When things come to them, they think about sea level rise. In addition, they have input about those very specific resources that are key to implementation. So I personally would like to keep the diverse commissions represented on the subcommittee. But what we're thinking about doing is expanding the scope of the subcommittee just in topic wise. So not just addressing sea level rise, but as we move forward into addressing other types of climate issues, so wildfire, extreme heat, interaction with our hazard mitigation program, that we could utilize this subcommittee for that whole suite of issues.
I thank you for that clarification. I think that makes sense because it's all interrelated. So what happens up in the foothills affects what happens down in the coastal zone and vice versa. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that new process, and thank you for your comments. And just a note, so we don't miss it, for those who are keeping time, in 3 minutes, it will be 2:22 in the afternoon on 2/22/22. Got to get that out there so you don't miss it, because you'll never get another chance to see it.
On a Tuesday.
Oh, there you go.
Fortuitous. I have I have some questions too. It's nice to see you, Ms. Hetrick. And so I guess following up on Councilmember Friedman's questions about structure a little bit. So we have the Sustainability Committee, and it has sort of expanded in scope. And I think some of those issues are tied to sustainability and resilience. And then those that would be considered by this sort of reimagined sea level rise committee, there would be overlap like there is today, like you're presenting to us here, but then also more decision making or recommendations would be coming from that subcommittee? Or how do you envision the sort of crossover of those two committees?
Chair Sneddon, that's a very good question. We've thrown around a lot of ideas on that. I mean, there's been the idea that maybe the same council members on sustainability committee should be on the climate adaptation subcommittee just to have continuity. But I don't think that's necessarily required. I see the role of the climate adaptation subcommittee as not, historically, it hasn't really been a voting body, but more of input into priorities and scoping items. That can certainly change over time if needed. But historically, that's the way it's been formed. But
that sounds good to me. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was tracking sort of the two different missions kind of the two different committees. And then I had a question about the grants, which I am so grateful that we have already adopted a sea level rise adaptation plan and all that went into that. And so these three grants are for studies. Yes. So there's none of that grant money goes into actual implementation of whatever comes out of those studies at this point. The 630,000 and then the 1.24 for the waterfront, that's for a waterfront adaptation plan, but not for any of the implementation. Is that correct?
Chair Sneddon, yeah, essentially these grants, especially with the waterfront adaptation plan, would get us to the point where our next application would be for environmental permitting and construction. So yeah, so essentially the harbor breakwater study is essentially that Army Corps feasibility study that's needed before you can get funding for construction. And similarly to the wastewater study, we'd end that study with a concept plan.
And those are studies that we sort of previously identified in the sea level rise adaptation plan, maybe not so much the airport facilities itself, but those three, I'm kind of looking at our little flow chart of the timelines for different. And so I'm wondering, are these in line with sort of when we were planning on looking at these, or did these grants kind of come up now? And so we're going to focus on them for now and see them through, or how does it fall within our like larger framework of what we had sort of set out with our sea level rise adaptation?
Well, when we set out, if you remember, we made the list of the highest priorities, and all of them I think are important to start as soon as possible. But I think in our minds it was going to take, over the course of several years to apply for funding, get projects going. And so what has been surprising is the amount of funding coming out of the state all at once. And so we are actually applying for a lot more than we thought we would, and having to really look closely at resources to be able to manage all these projects at once. The three that we've already gotten or being recommended for grant funding for, we clearly have the staffing for all three of those. But were we to keep applying for like coastal conservancy funding and other things like that, then we'd have to really look closely at how those are getting staffed.
So that I guess brings me to my bigger question about for this budget cycle. So this is sort of more grant funding than we thought we would be able to have at this period of time. And then you mentioned staffing, and I'm really happy with the reconfiguration of the resilience and sustainability, and with your changed role a little bit also too, but just as we go into this budget cycle, if it seems like there might not be enough staffing, or there might need to be budget considerations to be able to accept these grants and utilize them, or further grants, just, I don't know, I guess just a comment to be sure to put that out there in our budget cycle, because this is, I know it takes a lot to see these grants through. But you're saying you think there's enough staffing at this point for these three?
Tristan, yes, there's definitely enough staffing at this point for these three, or with staff that are being hired at this point. It's tricky because we haven't actually gotten the other grants, right? And in addition, they're offering funding only through 2027. So something that we have to think about is that we might not have that funding after that time period. So we're looking at different options for how to potentially still apply, but have enough staff resources.
It's all good news. I mean,
yeah, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and these things are being considered in the budget. It is hard because it is one of those things of a chicken and the egg situation with the funding. But
yeah, you need to have funding to spend the funding. Okay, I think those are my main questions. Oh, just one more about Beacon, the funds going to Beacon, and Beacon doing the beach studies. Is that, were we sort of anticipating that, or is that a departure from how we thought we would be monitoring shoreline?
Sure, Snedden. It's not a departure in how I wanted to do it all along. Beacon has been already doing monitoring with NOAA and USGS along our beaches. And so I think they're the perfect entity to take it on. But it did, over the last year or so, we've been working with Beacon toward changing their strategic plan to address sea level rise more, and talking to the other agencies, which some of them aren't as far along as we are in seeing the need for the project. And now we definitely have a broad support at the Beacon level. And at a minimum, I think we always wanted it to be at least Santa Barbara County, but it makes much more sense to do it through Beacon because it's basically then the entire littoral cell that's covered. And so, yeah, I think we always thought Beacon could be a good entity for this, and I'm very happy that they are willing to take it on.
Oh, good. Okay, that was what I was hoping to hear. Okay, thank you. I think, if there are any other comments, questions? Okay, I think we're ready for the next item. Thank you.
Thanks.
And that is the last item on the agenda. So, unless anybody has anything else, which I don't, there is no public comments, then I think we can go ahead and adjourn.
I'll ask a question before we adjourn. So for this sort of new framework of the Sustainability Committee and are we going to change the name of the sea level rise? Or if you could just give us a little bit of a overview of timeline of when those might be more defined.
Thank you, Councilmember Snedden, Alelia Parento from the Sustainability and Resilience Department. We are still having internal conversations and need to have conversations with Ms. Irely and Ms. Bjork on how they would like to structure that as well. So really in the early phases of that, but hopefully in the next few months, come back with a proposal of how we would see that advisory role, really providing advice to this committee and then to full council on public engagement processes.
Thank you. Are there any other comments before we adjourn? Okay. Thank you.